everyone, thank you for joining me today. I'm Jeannie from Miro Tea. Today I wanted to talk to you about making iced tea. As summer comes along and the weather is hot and us tea lovers, we start trying to figure out other ways of enjoying our tea while staying cool, and iced tea is the perfect way to do so. And so today I want to talk to you about the different ways of making tea, how to select tea for brewing, and so we'll get right into it. To pick your teas for brewing, I always like to suggest people pick teas that are more on the sweeter side and have a nice kind of a body to it. And you can figure this out by when you're drinking it when it's hot, how the flavor comes through. And so some examples that I have for you today are like a black tea that we're going to be brewing today, which is our Black Orchid. This black tea is a tea from Nilgiri, India, and Nilgiri teas are really really wonderful for brewing because actually has low likelihood of cloudiness and has a really nice brisk flavor while being rich and full in flavor at the same time. You're not going to get as much of the bitter tannins that you can maybe find, let's say if you were to ice it like Darjeeling or an Assam, let's say, right? And then the other spectrum would be herbals. This one is a tisane, which we have lots of fruit inclusions, hibiscus, you've got rose hips and berry pieces and such. Those are really amazing to ice because it's very easy to ice. You're never going to get bitter. You can't overbrew it really. It's fruity and refreshing, wonderful for children to kind of get into tea drinking. Beyond the just like black tea and herbals, our teas from certain regions are typically very good for brewing iced teas. One of my favorites would be Yunnan black teas. Yunnan black teas tend to have a very robust flavor while being relatively smooth. Japanese green teas are really wonderful if you're lovers of green teas. Japanese green teas particularly have that kind of bright grassy notes that are just really refreshing when it's iced in the summertime. Then you have, let's say, Taiwanese oolongs, amazing for icing. Taiwan is known for the really high quality oolongs that are usually drunk hot. But in Taiwan, they love to ice their teas as well, and particularly the oolongs. And the oolongs have natural floralness. When the lighter teas have natural floralness, then you have the darker ones that can be kind of a little semi-roasty, but they all have a nice, rich, heavier body that when iced brews very well, very consistently, very smooth, and very satisfying to drink. And then as far as herbals goes, mint blends, fruity blends, those are really kind of your tried and true iced teas for herbals. So us at Miro, what we do with iced tea is we do two different types of iced tea. We usually make a single origin iced tea, and then we also make iced teas for iced tea infusions. So the single origin cold brew iced teas are, what we're doing is we're finding a tea that we really love that is from a single producer, whether it be a single farm or a single region. And what we do is with that, because the flavor is just so special and unique, we then cold brew it to extract out its potential for an iced form. And so we just, as a demonstration to our customers, what's possible for this tea, not just in hot form, but in cold form. And then the other option that we use iced teas for is to make a concentration, which we then use for iced tea infusions. We can make we have a green tea mojito, or we make a concentrated iced green tea, and then we add, mint and lime juice and our own homemade syrups, and we shake it up, and so then it becomes this really crisp, refreshing, minty iced tea. You could do that at home with and kind of play around and create a whole variety of different concoctions. And it's a really, really fun and creative way of enjoying tea. The first method we're going to talk about is hot brewing. Hot brew method is a really kind of nice, convenient way of brewing tea for me when I just feel like having iced tea all of a sudden, but I don't want to wait a long time to get it. So I will, kind of throw some tea together and hot brew it, and I can have really refreshing hot iced tea in about 5 minutes. But there are certain pros and cons with the method of hot brewing teas. The pro being that it's very quick. It's very convenient. You don't have to, if you have guests suddenly over and it's hot and you want to have iced tea, you can throw that together. And you can have hot iced tea, or you can have iced tea kind of on the fly. So that's a really wonderful convenience for hot brewing tea. The next one being that hot brewing can yield a much stronger brew. If you're wanting, kind of like a more potent, more kind of like in-your-face flavor, hot brewing can kind of extract the tea much more strongly, and so you get kind of a richer, more of a just kind of like an in-your-face flavor is what you're going to get. And so versus kind of like a smoother, rounder flavor that you get with cold brewing. But the cons of hot brewing is that you run the risk of overbrewing your tea possibly. Once when you put that hot water in there and if you're not keeping track of your timing, or you're straining your tea too slowly or whatever, all of those are kind of seconds that that cause your tea to overbrew. So there's kind of like less room for error, for hot brewing. So that is one thing to kind of consider when you're wanting to use this method. The other one is tea cloudiness. This can happen often with black teas, particularly. Black teas have a lot of tannins, and it has a lot of caffeine. And when you're hot brewing, what you're doing is that you're extracting the caffeine and the tannins out of the tea leaf very quickly and kind of like an aggressive manner, right? And so and all of that kind of comes out into the water, and as it cools, it becomes visible and creates that cloudiness in your tea. And it doesn't mean that it's gonna affect the flavor so much. It's just that as far as serving, it's just not going to be visually as appealing, right? So if it's just for yourself, perhaps, or you don't mind the cloudiness, don't worry about it so much. And then another one is just kind of, it's a hassle. It can be a little bit more of a hassle, a little bit more equipment that's going to be needed to make hot iced tea. Technically, you kind of need 2 pitchers or 2 containers to brew in one, and then to strain out into the next, plus a strainer to strain it into the second container. So there's a little bit more kind of equipment and kind of steps to making hot iced tea. So if that, that's kind of another and main reason and detractor for brewing hot method. So now I'm going to walk you through the method of brewing hot tea, or hot iced tea, sorry. First step is know the size of, or the volume of, the final container that you're going to use to serve your tea in, okay? So for today, we're going to hot brew this tisane. It's our cherry berry, and I chose this because hot brewing won't affect the flavor too much. It will, and you can't really mess it up as far as getting over brewing or turning bitter and such. And it's a really great contender for hot brewing. So we're going to do that today. And the final container that we're going to serve it in is this water pitcher, right? And this water pitcher, I already know, and you can measure, is about 7 cups. And so that means we're gonna brew so we're gonna weigh out the amount of tea that we need for a 7-cup container, right? And the amount of tea that you want to use is about 3 to 4 grams per 8 ounces of water. And so with that, I weighed out about, I aired kind of in between. So rather than 21 grams, I just rounded up to 25 because I know that I kind of like this tea a little bit stronger. And so play around with that for your own teas. That that's kind of a general starting point as far as that weight goes. And you can always increase or decrease for your own preferences. But as initially to kind of start out and see how you like it, I recommend the 3 grams to 4 grams per 8 ounces of water. So here I have 25 grams of tea here, and as I mentioned before, with hot brewing you want to use 2 different containers, and I brought out my teapot here, and I'm going to brew it in this, hot brew it in this container, and then I'm going to pour it into this container. And I chose this one because it's about, the volume of this one is about half of this guy, okay? So this is about 3 to 4 cups of water of volume in here, and that's how you want to brew your tea. You want to brew your tea in about half the volume that you are of your final container. Okay, so you're going to use the full amount of tea with half the amount of water, and then ultimately in the end we're going to dilute it to the full amount for the rest of the amount with some ice to cool it down, and that's where you're going to get kind of that, you know, very quick method of getting iced tea. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to add our 25 grams of tea into my teapot. And next you want to do the next step you want to follow is make sure that you're using the proper temperature and the proper time for your tea. So that is still an important factor that you want to keep track of. So with the herbals, it's generally brewing time is about 4 to 5 minutes. You can really go longer if you like. There's no really messing up as far as time-wise go, but you want to do a minimum of about 4 to 5 minutes though in order to fully extract the flavor. Also the health benefits as well that a lot of herbals contain. So here I've got my boiling water ready, and so proper temperature for herbals is boiling, and so I'm going to fill my container. With some boiling water. Okay. And so I've got about 3 to 4 cups of water right here, which I know is about half of this guy, right? And so once this is done steeping, I'm going to strain it in here. But how long do I steep it for? I steep it for 4 to 5 minutes. So have your timer ready. 2, 3, 4. And then here we go. All right, so our tea is now done, okay? So now we're going to strain this pot of tea into our final container, all right? And so you're gonna need a strainer of some form, whether that be like I don't know, some kind of like a small mesh strainer. I have my filter that I'm going to use. I don't have anything really quite small enough for this other than this filter, but it fits quite nicely actually. This one is a fine mesh strainer that I know that will catch any kind of particles. But the good thing is, like, this is quite a large particle herbal tea, so you know there's not a whole lot of like dust or anything like that I need to worry about catching. But if you are brewing a finer leaf tea, whether that means like, you know, where you're going to get a lot of dust particles, you want to double strain it because what ends up happening is that the bottom, the dust particles will settle and will overbrew your tea as it even when it's cold. So you can double strain it if you're using a finer mesh tea, finer leaf tea. But I have this fine mesh filter here which will catch everything, so I don't have to worry about that. So we're gonna pour all the tea into our container. And it's basically almost exactly half of this pitcher. So that's a great start. And now we're going to move on to the next method, which is to add ice to our pitcher. So the reason why we add ice to it is that, I mean, what you can do is you can add cold water to the rest of it, and what you'll have is kind of like a warmish tea, which will then still need to be cooled in the refrigerator, which will still take quite a bit of time, you know. But if you want to drink it now, this method will help you get iced tea immediately, okay? And the idea is that you're going to fill this, you're going to slowly fill this with ice, and it's going to melt down slowly. And as it melts, the tea will get colder and colder, but then you're going to have ultimately the same ratio of water as you normally should have if you were to brew the whole thing with tea, but yet now you have cold tea, and so now you can drink this immediately over ice and such. So we'll demonstrate. Just gonna put some ice in there. So you're gonna put a little bit of ice at a time, and you're gonna melt this down. Okay. You want to slowly melt the ice as it's gradually, as we're gradually adding volume into the container. So we're fully distributing the ice through the tea, and it's cooling down already. that melt. And temperature-wise, it's already at room temperature, actually. And we still have a little bit more space left for more ice, which will then bring it to cold officially. Now you're probably wondering, like, why don't I just fill the whole thing with ice, and let it ice, right? What you'll find is that when you do that, is that you'll end up having a pitcher full of ice and then some tea in there, and that ice will ultimately all still melt, okay? And when that happens, you'll get an the water ratio to the tea will suddenly be skewed, and you'll have a diluted tea, which isn't what you intended to make, right? So we'll ice the tea after it's been cooled down. So that's the intention here. The rest of the ice in here. And as you'll find, it's harder and harder to melt this ice. And that little bit of ice is fine. It'll melt the rest of the way, but it will ultimately get to about right where we want it to be. And so, but the key is now the tea is now iced. It's actually cold and very ready to drink now, whether just without ice. If those who don't like extra ice in their tea, this is already cool and it's already, it's nice and chilly. And then pour it over. It's ready to go. Next, we're going to talk about the cold brew method. The cold brew method is my personal favorite method of brewing teas. You often hear cold brew coffee. That's kind of the industry that's really kind of taken ownership of this method. But you absolutely can cold brew tea, and with tea, you have such a wide range of teas out there in the world that you can experiment with, and with cold brewing, you get to taste the kind of the natural, very smooth, very palpable flavors of the tea that the farmer intended you to try. So the pros of cold brew method would be that you are going to be able to produce a much more smoother, much more rounded tea. It's known for that slow cold extraction that gets performed on that tea leaf makes it much more richer and produces a much more balanced flavor. Another benefit is that you're going to get to experience more nuance and more complexity in the tea, depending on which tea. Not all of them, are going to display that, but like certain teas that have it, you'll be able to really extract those flavors. Particularly, a fun one to experiment with would be like high-grade Japanese teas such as Gyokuro or Kabuseicha. That have this kind of like both this balance of sweet and umami and grassy flavors. When you do a very cold, very long extraction, you're gonna get this kind of like this amazing range of flavors that you really actually don't even get when you're brewing it hot, whether it be drinking it just, traditionally drinking it hot. So you can, experience a completely different side of tea, depending on the tea, just simply by cold brewing the tea. Another benefit is that it's just very easy. It's a very convenient way of making iced tea. You're talking about just, your simple container with your tea leaves in the bottom, cold or room temperature water, and then you just let it sit, and then you wait the right amount of time, and then it's ready to go. And we use it at Miro as well for doing kind of the single origin ones. These are the specialties that we want to really kind of highlight for our customers, the different notes and any kind of complexity that the tea might demonstrate. And so we make sure that we cold brew those teas every time. The main con for cold brewing would be the wait. Cold brewing teas, you're having to do this kind of long, slow extraction, which requires, depending on the tea, anything from like 2 hours all the way to 24 hours. And so that may not be convenient for some, but for but for me, you know, and for a lot of tea lovers, you know, that wait is worth it because the reward is just quite amazing when you get to drink a really amazing cold brew iced tea. So how to cold brew tea? It's quite simple. It's pretty straightforward, but I'll walk you through it. And there are certain key points that you do want to kind of consider when you are cold brewing, though, and that is your the quality of water that you use and the quantity of tea that you use. Those are going to be kind of, because it's such a simple method, these the details become kind of important, right? And so the amount of tea that you use is ultimately going to determine the strength and the flavorfulness of this tea, and then the quality of water, because we're using cold or room temperature water, and the quality of water will play a role in how your tea will finally taste in the end. I like to use artesian well water or spring water that I like to collect, and I've been drinking that water for the last 13 years, and it just for me makes the best tasting tea all around. It's also the tea that I like to drink because I know it's not been chlorinated or in any way. There's no additives at all. There's no occlusions, whether it be from the kind of the old pipes and such, and so I know it's quite clean and pure, and so I like to use it as my water source, but also my tea making water particularly. So and then the tea that you want to use, teas, almost all the teas really brew really well, cold brew method, but black teas particularly do really well with cold brewing. And today we're going to be doing this Indian Nilgiri. It's our black orchid tea. I love this tea so much because it's not only just great when it's hot, but when it's cold, it is the quintessential black tea for me because it has that briskness that you look for in a black tea, but then it has this kind of like wonderful smoothness to it. It has like rich, bold, chocolatey notes, while also having kind of a like a lingering flavor after you've drunk it. It kind of holds in your tongue, and you kind of retaste that flavor again. So it's quite an amazing experience. And so I drink this, and my husband loves it, and it's just our go-to black tea right now. So and we are going to be using this bottle right here, which is my personal iced tea bottle. It doesn't brew a whole lot of tea at a time, so you end up having to brew more or more often, I guess, if you're drinking a lot more iced tea at the moment. But for me, I like it because then I just I don't drink a whole lot of iced tea in one sitting. If you do, I would prefer, I recommend a much larger container, like go brew a large pitcher like this or such. And so, but this one I use it because it's convenient, and it has all the components that I need for making cold brew tea. I particularly like it because it has this built-in filter, which it's removable. But with this built-in filter means that I can then just steep and pour into my cup, and I don't need to worry about straining it with a separate utensil and such. So this is something to look for. And the container is glass, which I prefer as well. Glass will yield the kind of I know for sure that there's not going to be any kind of leaching and such from my container, but if you do need to use plastic, that's fine. With cold brew method, you're not going to get as much of a threat for leaching. So that's particularly a good, cold brew is a particularly good method for plastic containers, okay? And the amount of tea that we're going to use for this container, I know this is a 24-ounce container, and I'm going to use that 3 to 4 ounce ratio per 8-ounce cup ratio that we spoke about earlier in the hot brew method. And so I have here 13 grams of tea. It's a little bit more, than the ratio, but I already know this tea very well, and I like it a little bit stronger. So I always use 13 grams for this guy, okay? And all you do is you add your tea to your container. You're gonna fill it with your cold or room temperature water. I like to just use room temperature water. Make sure all the leaves are thoroughly wetted and it's swirling around, so you make sure that it's gets plenty of, so you know that no leaf is left dry or is not going to be able to steep. So got here, everything's in there, nicely swirling. And then just pop this lid, oops. So you just pop this lid right on top. And this guy just then sits on my counter for the next couple of hours. This will make an amazing black tea in just 2 hours flat, or you can brew it overnight, and it'll be even stronger and more richer and more flavorful. And so depending on your preference, I personally don't like teas that are like super cold, and so that's why I like room temperature. But if I was to place it in the fridge, then it'll definitely brew much slower, but then you'll have ice cold tea when you're ready to drink it tomorrow morning. All right, so now we've walked through 2 different types of iced tea brewing methods with you, and hopefully that helps you understand how to and makes you feel more confident about making iced tea at home. Iced teas are a fun and refreshing way to enjoy tea in this warmer months in the summer, and with some experimentation and creativity, you can create endless combinations and beverages to help cool you down all summer long. Thanks for joining me. If you like our videos, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you can be updated on the latest videos. Also be sure to check out our Miro TV channel where you'll find even more tea videos, as well as some shots and videos of our store in Seattle, which are also fun as well. So thanks for watching.